Welcome. This is Mel here, back again. We're looking at the Dome of the Rock once more. A year or two ago, I did quite a lot of videos on this topic, based on A.J. Juice's paper, Serpent King. But there was a bit of pushback from Thomas Alexander. He questioned some of the documents that A.J. Juice found. Some of them didn't stack up. But he hadn't offered tangible proof of the existence of the inscription before the 16th century, which is the nub of the question. And doubts remain as regards the true antiquity of its inscriptions. I'm still of the opinion that A.J. Juice is fundamentally right, that the inscriptions don't come from the 7th century. It's easy to read whatever you like into the inscription, especially if you have a vested interest in wanting the inscription to be from the 7th century, because they are useful if they were from the time. And it's always a disappointment when you find that early sources turn out not to be as early as we would hope. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at what we're talking about. Where exactly is the arcade wall where the famous inscription is located? So I need you to look at the green line in the picture to the far right. So you can see there's an arcade wall inside the Dome of the Rock. It's not quite under the dome. It's kind of in from it, or out from it, I should say. So it's you have the outer wall of the Dome of the Rock, and then the next set of walls, which form an octagonal, is the arcade. And there's a section on both sides of the arcade. So if you imagine that green line there, on both sides of that wall is this famous inscription. And then on the inner part, you have a round section with a dome above, and underneath the dome is the sacra, the rock that is exposed and believed by Muslims to be where Muhammad stood before ascending into heaven. So that's what we're talking about here. The big question is, was the inscription that's denoted there in green, was it from the 690s? Now, Ibn Khaldun, considered the father of historiography and one of the greatest social scientists of the Middle Ages, lived 200 years after Saladin. During his latter years, he worked in completing his monumental al-Muqaddimah and the rest of Kitab al-Ibar. Even though not a primary witness, he confirms that Crusaders had built a church on the foundation stone, which they venerated. Saladin destroyed the Christian church, uncovered the rock, and rebuilt the mosque in about the same form in which it is still standing. He lived 200 years after the Crusades. What does he say about the building which is now on the Temple Mount? So here is his quite long book, Al-Muqaddimah, and there's a table of contents, chapter 4, part 6, the mosques and venerated buildings of the world. So let's have a look in there. This one here is not directly related to the Dome of the Rock, but I couldn't resist sharing this. He admits there is no sound historical information in this connection on which one may rely. So what's he on about? He says that Mecca is said to have originated when Adam built it opposite the much frequented house. Later on, Mecca was destroyed in the flood. So this is a belief commonly held among Muslims, but Ibn Khaldun admits there is no sound historical information in this connection on which one may rely. The information is merely derived from the indication in the verse of the Quran, and when Abraham raised the foundations of the house. So they're building the entire narrative around about Mecca based on that one single verse, and he's admitting it. It's not coming from me. This Muslim scholar is saying it about 600 years ago, So it's merely based on just one ayah of the Quran and not on any historical information that they have. Now, here's the bit that's relevant. So this is in relation to the history behind the building, which is on the Temple Mount, from the point of view of the 15th century. Okay, so he's looking at it from the point of view where he stands in the 15th century. Obviously, we'll hold what he's saying with a certain level of skepticism. If he lies, he's obviously going to be lying in his interests. If he's saying something which goes against his interests, I'd be more inclined to give that a little bit more veracity, because there's no incentive for him to lie about something that goes against the standard Islamic narrative. Okay, so with that out of the way, here's what he says. During the 5th, which is the 11th century AD, and especially at the end of it, the power of the Caliphate weakened. Jerusalem was in the possession of the Ubaydid Fatimids, the Shia caliphs of Cairo. Their power too crumbled. The European Christians advanced towards Jerusalem and took possession of it. They also took possession of all the border cities of Syria. Upon the Holy Rock, they built a church, which they venerated, and in the construction of which they took great pride. What is he saying? He's not saying they adapted a building on the Temple Mount. He's not saying they just added bits and pieces to the Dome of the Rock. He's saying they built a church where supposedly the Dome of the Rock existed prior to that. Okay? And it says, in the construction of which they took great pride. So they're obviously taking great care in terms of how they put it together with this church. So they put a bit of thought to it, which is not what I would imagine you would say if they merely just adapted a pre-existing building and turned it into a church. Because it's easy to take a building, get rid of, any obvious Muslim symbols, and then away you go, say your mass in there. But no, he's saying they took pride in the construction of this church which they built. Okay. Eventually, Salah ad-Din bin Ayyub al-Kurdi became the independent ruler of Egypt and Syria. He wiped out the influence and heresy of the Ubaydid or Fatimids. He advanced towards Syria and waged the holy war against the European Christians there. Okay. He deprived them of possession of Jerusalem and the other border cities of Syria they were holding. This took place around the year 580, 1184-85. Salah ad-Din destroyed the Christian church. Now again, he's not saying they just little tweaked it here, tweaked it there. He's saying he destroyed the Christian church, uncovered the rock, and rebuilt the mosque in about the same form in which it is still standing at this time. He's not saying in the same form it was prior to the Christian church. He's saying in the form that it is today, which is the 15th century. Now, in the 16th century, Caliph Suleiman did a big restoration to the Dome of the Rock, adding a load of mosaics inside and outside the Dome of the Rock. So just bear that in mind as well. That would be an ideal opportunity to add your inscription to buttress the standard Islamic narrative as you're waging war against Europe. So if you think about it, the Caliph Suleiman was sort of on a counter crusade against Europeans. He was taking over country after country in Europe, the eastern part of Europe. So the Crusades would be very much in mind, and the fact that the Crusades had taken over the Temple Mount centuries before and had the audacity to put up Christian inscriptions inside that building and venerated Jesus there, saying the Mass and so forth. That's a pretty big incentive to put up inscriptions with an argument against all of that. All right. Now, A.J. Juice says that Jerusalem, and this is referring to 1099, was henceforth occupied by Christian rulers for almost 2 centuries. Given the insults that are hurled toward the Crusaders' beliefs in a nature of Jesus who is both God and man, the inscriptions would not likely have survived this period. If you can imagine, if those inscriptions were there and they are calling into question the whole Christian theology, when a priest says Mass in a building, they first consecrate the building, they bless it, they would get rid of anything which is demonic or evil or contrary to the faith. They wouldn't just plaster over it, they would get rid of it. That would be job number 1. And they wouldn't just go, well, it's in Arabic, we can't read it, we'll just leave it there, it's probably nothing. Obviously, they're going to check it out. They're not going to just let it be, because there's bound to be a Christian in the congregation who's going to say, oh, why have you got that up on the wall which is mocking Jesus? Why wasn't that removed? You know? So, and it's a sure thing there would have been. The Crusaders were Latin speaking, but the people who were from that area who were Christian, because they weren't all Muslim, they spoke Arabic. Okay? So of course they would be able to read it. This is the thing that Thomas Alexander didn't get, and I didn't want to be too harsh in response to it, but he's living in a fantasy world if he thinks there were no Arab-speaking Christians at that time. There clearly was. There's been always a Christian Arab presence in Israel, and of course they could read Arabic. You know, it's just a fantasy land stuff to think that there were no Christian Arabs. And the other thing is that you have to imagine that the priests there that would have said Mass, they would be multilingual. They would be interacting with the population. They would have had knowledge of Arabic. Even if they didn't have it when they went there, if they came from Europe, they would have acquired it. They didn't just sit on the laurels. That was part of their job, to be able to conduct themselves properly. So, yeah, I just think this is really implausible that the inscriptions, if they existed, would have survived. So I totally agree with A.J. Juice. I haven't seen anything contrary to that. Now, if someone can give me evidence that there was a genocide against the Arab Christians and every single one was killed, I'll accept that evidence. But other than that, I can't see how there were no Arab Christians there in Jerusalem at that time. But short of that, it's just not plausible that no Christian could speak Arabic or read Arabic in Jerusalem at that time. It's just not a goer. I'm sorry, it's just not. So the Crusaders were in the Holy Land from 1095 to 1291. So what did the Crusaders do after the conquest of the Dome of the Rock? So you have to imagine they've took over Jerusalem. They're now on the Temple Mount. There is a building there connected with Islam. Did they just say, do you know what, we respect all religions, kumbaya and all that. We're very ecumenical. We're going to leave the building as is, because, you know, it's of great historical importance. We're not going to do anything to it. Is that what happened? Or did they radically change what's there? So, we'll look at some sources. First, John of Würzburg. He was a German priest who made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 1160s. This would have been about 60 years after the conquest of Jerusalem. And wrote a book describing the Christian holy places, the Descriptio Terrae Sanctae, the description of the Holy Land. The Descriptio is known from 4 manuscripts, the earliest and longest, now CLM 19418, in the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Munich, dates to the late 12th or early 13th century and comes from Tegernsee Abbey. So that's a pretty early source, the late 12th century. So he wrote in the 1160s, so in the late end of that same century we have a manuscript, so I think that's pretty reliable. Okay, you can have a look at it here. Alright, the archive.org is a great place to find these documents and books. Now, I'm not going to read all of it, but it says, at the entrance to the temple towards the west above the vestibule is an image of Christ with this inscription around it: my house shall be called the house of prayer. So clearly they've put up inscriptions to claim the building as a church, or maybe this is part of a new building, as Ibn Khaldun asserted. Okay, and then elsewhere it says, above this narrower wall is raised on high a round vault painted within and covered without with lead, on the summit of which the figure of the Holy Cross has been placed by the Christians, which is very offensive to the Saracens, and many of them would be willing to expend much gold to have it taken away. For although they do not believe in Christ's passion, nevertheless they respect this temple because they adored their Creator therein, which nevertheless must be regarded as idolatry on the authority of Saint Augustine, who declares that everything is idolatry which is done without faith in Christ. So that inscription would be part of that. In terms of idolatry, that inscription would not last a day, especially if there's masses being said in the same area. Now, the Crusaders put inscriptions proclaiming the Christian message around the church. This is a little bit more detail on that, so you get a flavour for all the various inscriptions. So this is from, again, John of Fürstenberg, who was a German priest. Okay. Around about the temple and partly under its roof on the outside as you go up on the west is this inscription: may this house enjoy eternal peace from the eternal Father. That doesn't sound Muslim to me. Blessed be the glory of the Lord in his holy place. On the south side is, the Lord's house is well built upon a firm rock. Blessed are they who dwell in thy house. They shall praise thee forever and ever. On the east is, of a truth the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. In thy house, O Lord, all men shall tell of thy glory. On the north is, the temple of the Lord is holy, and the Lord careth for it. The Lord hath built it. In the inside of the temple is written in great letters on the upper cornice around the building, the respond, hear my hymn, O Lord, with its answering verse, look upon me, O Lord. On the lower cornice also are written in golden letters several verses of the hymn, Jerusalem the Blessed. They have fully Christianized this building, whether it was built afresh, as Ibn Khaldun says, or it was simply altered. You can see there's plentiful Christian inscriptions, and yet there's not a single mention of an Arabic inscription. Not even a mention that there's Arabic inside. At least not here. Now, another pilgrim. John Phocas was a 12th century Byzantine pilgrim to the Holy Land. He wrote an account of his travels. The so-called ekphrasis, or concise description of the holy places. Now, doubt has arisen over whether Phocas was in fact the author of this book, which has been reattributed instead to John Ducas, who went on an imperial mission to the Holy Land in 1177. So it's one of these Johns. I suppose the key thing is, what did he say? All right. So the key message here is that he says it is a church. Towards the eastern side of the city is a church which is the Holy of Holies. This church is most exceedingly beautiful, having a vaulted roof and standing upon the ancient foundation of the renowned Temple of Solomon, decorated both within and without with variegated marbles and mosaics. On the left side of this church are two vaulted chambers. in one of which is depicted the presentation of our Lord Jesus, because in that place the just man Simeon received our Lord Christ into his arms, and in the other the wondrous ladder which Jacob saw reaching up to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending it. Beneath the picture of this ladder is to be seen the stone upon which Jacob laid his head. On the right hand may be found an opening leading down to a grotto beneath the church, wherein is buried the prophet Zacharias, whom the Jews slew, according to the Gospel, between the temple and the altar. Without the church is a large paved court, being, I imagine, the ancient floor of the temple. Near the gate which leads to the holy Gethsemane is the church of St. Joachim and St. Anna, wherein the birth of the Immaculate Virgin took place, and near to this the waters of the pool which is near the sheep gate spring forth. Alright, so we can clearly see a description of the interior of a church on the foundation stone on the Temple Mount. Now, we have this paper by Benjamin Kedar and Dennis Pringle, and they have got some good things to say, but they also are beholden to the standard Islamic narrative, as we'll see. So they're a mixed bag, but it's interesting just to detect the kind of faulty logic that goes on when people are bending over backwards to defend the standard Islamic narrative, even though it doesn't make sense. Frankish rule over Jerusalem lasted just 88 years, during which, for the first time since the demise of the Second Jewish Commonwealth, Jerusalem was a capital city, the capital of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, which extended at the height of its expansion from Beirut in the north to the head of the Gulf of Aqaba in the south. These 88 years occupy a special place in the Esplanade's history, for it was only during this period that its Islamic shrines came under Christian control. Christian rule was symbolized by a huge golden cross set atop the Dome of the Rock. This caused grave offence to Muslims, some of whom offered the Franks much gold to secure its removal, but without success. Now, you notice that these writers have assumed that the Dome of the Rock is the building, right? There's the Pilgrims that we just read refer to a vaulted ceiling, not necessarily a dome. So they're assuming a lot there. It goes on to say, this caused grave offence to Muslims, some of whom offered the Franks much gold to secure its removal, but without success. Okay, so the Muslims were not happy with a cross on top of the building. The Dome of the Rock became an abbey church, served by Augustinian canons, and known as the Lord's Temple, Templum Domini. The Aqsa Mosque came to be known as the Temple or Palace of Solomon, Templum Salomonis, or Palatium Salomonis, serving first as the palace of the Frankish kings and later as the headquarters of the military order of the Knights Templar. So what we can see here is that it became a church, and even more so an Augustinian church. Okay. Now, this paper goes on to say that the pilgrim John of Würzburg, who visited Jerusalem in the early 1160s, reports that Muslim worshippers were allowed to pray on a spot just south of the Dome of the Rock at a sundial, which the Franks regarded as originally having been the altar at which the Old Testament priest Zechariah met his death. At least one Jew managed to pray at the esplanade or even within the dome. For Maimonides writes, I entered the great and holy house, and I prayed in it on Thursday the 6th day of Mar Heshvan, that is 14th of October 1165. Some prominent Muslim visitors were allowed to enter the dome and Al-Aqsa. However, the two shrines and the entire esplanade were thoroughly Christianized. Now, here's an example of how they can assume a bit too much. Writing in the 1170s or the early 1180s, William of Tyre, the great historian of the Frankish kingdom of Jerusalem, also has no doubts about the shrine's builder. For him, it is not Helena, but the Caliph Umar. William claims to make this statement on the basis of Arabic mosaic inscriptions on the shrine's interior and exterior, a statement that casts grave doubts on his knowledge of Arabic, since no such inscription existed. Do you see what they're doing? They're assuming, based on the current situation of Dome of the Rock, where there is no such Umar inscription, they're assuming that William must have got it wrong. William is living in the 12th century, so he had the at least opportunity to see the inscriptions. Okay? Now, even granting that William of Tyre didn't know Arabic, which is doubtful considering they would have had to interact, and they would, surely have picked up at least a rudimentary amount of Arabic, surely. A basic introduction to Arabic letters would allow him to see that there's a name Umar written on the inscription. But there were loads of Arab Christians on which he could have turned to find out what does this inscription say. So, there's so much wrong with their statement, which says, a statement that casts grave doubts on his knowledge of Arabic, since no such inscription existed. See how they've got it upside down? If he is asserting it, he's asserting it based on something. He must know at some level. He's not saying, I wonder would this inscription be saying Umar? Like, why isn't he just randomly saying it could be this, it could be that, it could be the other? How come he's so definite about it? I would suggest he knows, whether through his own personal knowledge of Arabic, even if it's rudimentary, or through other Arab speakers. He's not going to put that down if he's a historian, is he? A classical historian would need to be sure of their sources. This isn't just any old fool, he's a historian. So you'd expect him to do due diligence to find out what exactly is this Arabic on the exterior and interior of the building. Okay? So there are some inscriptions. Now, the inscriptions would appear to be short if it just simply saying that the builder of the building originally was Umar. Which doesn't necessarily mean that building was in continuous existence, because if Umar's building was created in the 7th century, it could have been reconstructed multiple times. That's fair enough. The inscription isn't necessarily from the 7th century, just simply because there's an inscription saying that Umar built the building originally. That could be done at any time. So that's another thing. Okay, moving on from there. So again, from this paper, the written sources contain many details about the appearance of the Lord's Temple under Frankish rule. According to Fulcher, I'm not sure which way you pronounce it. According to Fulcher of Chartres, for the first 15 years after the conquest, the rock remained exposed, but because it disfigured the building, it was then covered over and paved in marble. By the time he wrote in the 1120s, an altar had been placed over it, and a choir fitted out for the canons. A Muslim chronicler, Ibn al-Athir, later reported that one of the Frankish kings had ordered the rock to be covered because the Frankish priests used to break off fragments of it to sell to pilgrims. It is possible that the wrought iron grill with which the Franks enclosed the rock, first mentioned in an Icelandic account circa 1150, served for its protection, besides acting as a chancel screen. Now, considering they're chipping away at the rock, there is a possibility that the parts of the rock which look like footprints could have actually been originally the result of Christians chipping away at the rock in the first place. The floor would have looked a little bit like a quarry. And so when Muslims claim today, oh, here are the footprints of Muhammad before he ascended into heaven, there's a good chance that the supposed footprints could have been the result of that chipping away by Christian pilgrims. So it's kind of like going to a quarry and seeing certain grooves and assuming some historical story based on it. It's a bit dubious. Now, it goes on to say, images decorated the walls and numerous Latin mosaic inscriptions covered the building's exterior and interior. Now, so it speaks of the foundation stone being built over with marble and so on. So a platform would have been built over it. It's very different to how it would look today. And then on top of that, they would have built a high altar. Okay, so you have there the chapel of Jacob's dream and the chapel of the presentation, which are described earlier. You can see those on the left hand side. So that's how it would have looked at the time of the Crusades. This is a picture that was given to me by Paul Ellis from a book that he has. So it's obviously a reimagined image based on the various descriptions. And the grill that basically was protecting the stone to stop pilgrims from pilfering it, we still have a part of it that still exists, the Frankish grill around the rock. Now, I'd like you to notice that no evidence is offered for these assertions. The sin must be upheld. Inscriptions recorded around 1172 by another German pilgrim, Theodoric, suggest that the work of Christianizing and embellishing the Lord's temple went on almost continuously throughout the 12th century. Yet the Franks left its original Quranic inscriptions untouched. Where's the evidence? Even though the oldest of these rejected the Trinity and Jesus as the Son of God and extolled Muhammad as God's messenger and the Muslims' intercessor at the Last Judgment. Again, where is the evidence? So these writers are just affirming the standard Islamic narrative. Where's the evidence that the Franks left these inscriptions untouched? What would they be doing leaving those? These are an abomination to Christians, these inscriptions. There's no way a priest would tolerate these inscriptions in their building. Why would they? Why would they leave them there? They own the Temple Mount. They have full right to change it whatever way they want it. And if you go back to Ibn Khaldun, he talks about the Christians when they were building their church, that they took great care in the design of it. So that kind of cuts, it undermines the writers of this paper's assertions here. Probably the Franks were unaware of their content of these inscriptions. How is that possible? Are these writers living in a fantasy world where there are no Arab-speaking Christians living in Jerusalem in the 12th century? It's just bizarre. So are we to believe that no Christian in Jerusalem spoke Arabic? That's the absurd conclusion that these writers are making, because they are so beholden to the standard Islamic narrative. Their minds are not free to consider any other possibility. This is Theodoric's description. Talks about the number of steps that you go up to enter the temple. Okay, the temple of the Lord. Okay, so the temple itself is evidently of an octagonal shape in its lower part, so that bit fits with, the general shape of the Dome of Rock as it exists today, at least the foundation part. Its lower part is ornamented as far as the middle with most glorious marbles, and from the middle up to the topmost border on which the roof rests is beauteously adorned with mosaic work. Now this border, which reaches beyond the entire circuit of the temple, contains the following inscription. Oh, this should be good. Oh, we're looking forward now to the Arabic inscription here, which starting from the front or west door must be read according to the way of the sun as follows. On the front, peace be unto this house forever from the Father eternal. On the second side, the temple of the Lord is holy, God cared for it, God hallowed it. On the third side, this is the house of the Lord firmly built. On the fourth side, in the house of the Lord all men shall tell of his glory. On the fifth, blessed be the glory of the Lord out of his holy place. On the sixth, blessed are they which dwell in thy house, O Lord. On the seventh, of a truth the Lord is in his holy place, and I knew it not. On the eighth, the house of the Lord is well built upon a firm rock. Now, the last time I looked at the Arabic inscription, supposedly written in the 690s, I didn't see that inscription. So how come they're mentioning these words and not the Arabic one that we have today? They obviously couldn't read the Arabic and they're just guessing. That must be it. That's the explanation we seem to be given. Besides this, on the eastern side, over against the Church of St. James, there is a column represented in the wall in mosaic work, above which is the inscription, the Roman column. See, again, there's nothing about this, the big Arabic inscription that should be really obvious. It's like it's all around the arcade, but no mention of it. The upper wall forms a narrow circle resting on arches within the building and supports a leaden roof which has on its summit a great ball with a gilded cross above it. 4 doors lead into and out of the building, each door looking to one of the 4 quarters of the world. The church rests upon 8 square piers and 16 columns, and its walls and ceilings are magnificently adorned with mosaics. Now, in terms of the number of columns and so forth, and the piers, I'm sure if we were to compare that with what's in existence today, we'll probably find that they don't match. The circuit of the choir contains 4 main pillars or piers and 8 columns which support the inner wall with its own lofty vaulted roof. A vaulted roof, it's saying. That's not quite the same as saying a dome. Just bear in mind that. Above the arches of the choir, a scroll extends all around the building, bearing this text: "My house shall be called the house of prayer, saith the Lord. In it, whoeversoever asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks shall be opened. Ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find." Sounds like something out of the Quran, does it? I'm being sarcastic. In an upper circular scroll similarly placed around the building is this text, or this is the text. In an upper circular scroll similarly placed around the building is the text: "Have thou respect unto the prayer of thy servant and to his supplication, O Lord my God, that thine eyes may be open and thine eyes turned towards this house night and day. Look down, O Lord, from thy sanctuary and from the highest heaven, thy dwelling place." Now you can see that Theodoric has taken the effort to actually look around the church and actually write down what he sees. He is writing down text that's in Latin. He is not mentioning anything about an Arabic inscription, despite the fact that there is a 50-meter long Arabic inscription supposedly from the 690s there. There's no mention of it. Is he blind? Can you not see it? Even if he couldn't read the text, surely he would say, well, there's also a big inscription. I can't read it because I don't speak Arabic. Why is he not saying that? Why is there an absence of a mention of that? Even if you went to a zoo and you see an animal that you don't know what it is, you'd surely mention it. You say, well, there was an animal there. I don't know. It looked like maybe an elephant, but I'm not sure what it was. So there's essentially an elephant in the room, supposedly, an Arabic inscription. He can't read it. He doesn't even notice it or doesn't even mention it. How is that possible? So that's the problem. Now, so in conclusion to all of this, it seems more plausible that the inscriptions are in reaction to the Crusaders taking over the Dome of the Rock and therefore post-date the Crusades. The inscriptions were likely done in the 16th century when the Dome of the Rock had a major overhaul under Caliph Suleiman. I think this, as far as the options go, this is the most plausible. It is not believable that a long inscription was not transcribed and a translation found, given the numerous Arab Christians that lived in Jerusalem. There was mention of an Arab inscription which referred to Umar as building the building originally, but that's it. That's all we've got. Nothing about a longer inscription where it talks about the theology around Jesus and so forth. It stretches one's credulity, akin to saying one had a difficulty finding a bicycle in Amsterdam. There were lots of Arab-speaking Christians living in Israel, both then and now. So there was no reason for them to miss a big inscription. The excuse is often made, oh, but it was dark up on the ceiling, they couldn't read it up there. They had no problem reading the Latin inscriptions that were there, and that was equally up high, you know. So I just don't buy this whole nonsense. There's a certain blindness in people when they want something to be the case, and they don't see that there is no evidence to support it. So prior to the 16th century, there is no mention of this big, long Arab inscription. What we have is numerous contrary evidence of Christians claiming that this building was a church for 88 years, an Augustinian church, in fact. That goes way against the standard Islamic narrative's tale of about an inscription made when Abd al Malik made the building back in the 690s, supposedly. So that's it for today. There's a lot more coming in the next few weeks, so thank you for watching. See you all. Bye-bye.
There are 9 million bicycles in Beijing. That's a fact. It's a thing we can't deny. Like the fact that